Hey everyone, good to see all of you. My name is Jim Ryan and I'm the Dean of the Ed School. I am delighted to welcome you to our first session this year of the Master Class Series. We began this series last year and it is designed to both celebrate and investigate the great teaching that happens all across this university. So we invite faculty from across the university, sometimes from our own school, to present a class to all of you and then have a discussant ask the teacher some questions about why she did, what she was hoping to accomplish. It's my pleasure to introduce both our speaker and our discussant. Both our teacher and our discussant. Our teacher is Monica Higgins, who has been on our faculty since 2007 and just this year was named as the Kathleen McCartney Professor in Education Leadership. Prior to coming to the Ed School, Monica was on the faculty at the Harvard Business School. She has served as a consultant for companies like American Express and Bain & Company. She is an expert, among other things, in leadership development and organizational change. She is also an awesome teacher. And now I know some of you already know this. Others of you have heard it. Some of you might be skeptical and thinking, well, you're the dean, you have to say that, and we've chosen her as the master teacher, so I have to say that. So for those of you who may not be convinced, let me read a few selections from her course evaluations. These are the words of students who have taken her courses. One student wrote, "Monica Higgins is a force. She was so on it that she inspired you to be better than any best you have managed to muster up to that point." Another one remarked that they had never seen someone own a room as effectively as Professor Higgins. A third student described her facilitation of the class as, quote, "nothing short of a symphony." I hope I haven't raised expectations too high, Monica. Your co-conductor for tonight's symphony is Jim Honan. Jim is a senior lecturer here and has been on the faculty since 1991. Like Monica, he too is an expert in leadership and organizations and entrepreneurship. And like Monica, he is also an expert in the case method of teaching, and his teaching is renowned not only at the Ed School, but also at the Kennedy School and in executive leadership programs literally across the globe. He is a perfect person to serve as tonight's discussant. So Monica will lead us in a case discussion of the Everest case, and then Jim is going to ask her some questions, and then we'll open it up to all of you. Now, before I turn it over to Monica and Jim, just a couple of quick notes. First, the next master class in this series will feature Eric Mazur, who is the Balkansky Professor of Physics and Applied Physics, and the discussant for that event will be our own Dick Light, who is the Forsheimer Professor of Teaching and Learning. You could put that on your calendars now if you like. It will take place on Thursday, November 13th from 4 to 5:30 p.m. And second, I'd like to thank two people who made this class and this entire series possible, Lori Forcier and Matt Miller. I don't know if they're both here, but we should give them a round of applause. All right, and now please join me in welcoming Monica and Jim. All right.
Good afternoon, everybody. For those of you guys who are over here, please feel free to move in the middle, otherwise I might tilt in your direction. So if you would like to, or people sitting in the back, you're welcome to move in. I'm not going to force you to do that, but you're welcome to. It's a real honor to be here. What an honor to be able to teach a class, a master class at Harvard's Graduate School of Education. So I'm delighted to see you here, and I know that some of you have read the case, and I'm just going to assume that you have, or somebody sitting next to you has, which is terrific. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to teach the case until like 5 of 5, and I'm just going to abruptly stop, which is going to feel very awkward because, of course, we're going to be in a heated discussion, and you're going to want to keep going, which is terrific because you can just do that. You know, you can just keep going beyond this classroom environment and talk about Mount Everest, but and the exciting things we discussed in class. But I'm going to stop, and I'm going to stop abruptly so that Jim can ask me some tough questions, and so that you can ask me some tough questions. So, you know, why is Higgins moving over there? Why is Higgins walking over here? What am I trying to do? Okay? So we're kind of really pulling back the curtain, and you have a chance to ask some questions. So, you know, 10 out of 5 of something like that. All right? But for now, I'd like you to just completely get into the case. All right? So this is a case on high stakes decision making, crisis decision making. And we have a real tragic situation here. And we want to talk about why things have went so terribly, terribly wrong back in 1996. Okay, but before we do that, and to really get us into the case, I have a question for you. So, why is it that people climb very, very tall mountains? Okay, so forget the case for a minute. Just why do people climb these very, very tall mountains? And I'm going to ask you to raise your hands, and thank you for putting your names on your name card so I don't have to kind of go, hey, you. But, like, why do people do this? Sasha. It's fun. In what way is it fun? Have you done this before?
Nothing that high now. So.
But you're a climber. Yeah. Okay. So why? Perhaps nothing quite that tall or that high, but you'd say it's fun, and in what way?
It's very cohesive, but if you're with a good group of other climbers, it's a great experience.
So kind of a bonding experience, kind of a team experience. It could be, and yeah, we're off the case. You're right. So it could be fun from kind of a social perspective, the experience of it all, kind of doing a challenge, very serious challenge, though. Sasha, right?
I wouldn't try Everest now.
Yeah. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Other thoughts on this, Katie?
For street cred, say you did it, say you could.
Just say you could. Say you could.
Say you did it, right? That's
You
why
did
they
it.
want to turn
Yeah.
back.
All right. So this is something kind of
Ego based.
ego. All right. Yeah. To be able to say that you did it, you actually made it. Can't see your name quite right. Atma?
Just to feel the experience when you're there.
Feel the experience. What kind of experience are we talking about?
Probably an awesome kind of experience. Right? You get up there, you know you're here, and that not many people can really make it here, and you remember this for the rest of your life. Not to mention you can tell your kids and grandkids.
Okay, so here we are. We're back to the you did it, but it may not. I mean, feeling it up there. I mean, you're breathing through. What was it? A straw, right at that point. So it may not feel that good, but to be able to say and tell your grandkids and so forth that you did it, right? So that's kind of again this. For others or for yourself to be able to demonstrate to others that you did it. Again, making it up there. Okay, Bridget?
The internal sense of accomplishment. Yeah. So not to tell others, but to feel, to have the challenge and be able to meet the challenge.
Yeah. So this one is really for yourself. This is kind of extreme. Other thoughts? Is it Agu? Yes.
Well, because you have a kind of pathology, you know.
Tell me more.
Yeah, you have kind of this unnatural desire to kind of want to prove yourself in situations, and it's actually quite odd. to walk through this.
This belongs somewhere else.
Yeah.
But this proving thing,
Yeah.
yeah. Do you know anybody like this?
I think so. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know, they're always trying to do some. They're never satisfied. They want to do something better, something more, and it doesn't seem to be growing out of fun social things or something like that, but out of never being quite satified with what you can
Yeah. Yeah. So I was drawing this kind of squiggly
do. Right.
line here. It's kind of the sense, and high need for achievers tend to be kind of like this, you know. You get to a place and you look around the corner, you're like, that's not quite right. And then you keep going and you keep going, and it doesn't really stop, does it? That's kind of strange, odd thing, Maria.
I think it's also, I mean, on the upper kind of side together with the others and the self. And I think it's the adrenaline you get because you know that others cannot do it, but you're better than others.
You're better than others. Uh-huh. Yeah, so this is this proving thing again, right? You're proving to yourself and proving to others. Uh-huh. Now, do we have any, I know we talked to Sasha a little bit, who doesn't quite climb really tall mountains, but do we have any climbers in the room? Excellent. So tell us, are we kind of on track here?
I think so.
Yeah. Is there anything you would add to this? Why people do it?
Flow, experience flow.
Flow. Ah. Mm-hmm. And what kind of mountains do you climb? Do you climb these really tall ones where you can't breathe at the top and things like that? Huh?
Rock climbing.
Rock climbing. Okay.
It's a little different, but
A little different.
similar challenge, I guess.
Yeah. Lee.
So it's interesting to hear it referred to as pathology. There are some people who would say that about me on some things. I don't climb mountains like this, but there is a feeling of exhilaration in climbing other high peaks. There's a connection with nature.
Yes.
That's quite exciting.
Yeah.
I have to say, when I read Into Thin Air, which is the same case, I decided I would never want to climb Everest because it doesn't sound like fun.
No, this is the thing. I was surprised we kind of started there in this fun piece. It's like that.
Exaltation that perhaps you get at the top when you know that you have 1 second to be there and then go
Right.
down and maybe not live the way down. It was like, I'm over that.
Yeah, you're over that. You're done. Right? Yeah. Do we have any people do other things like, like jump out of planes, stuff like that? Yeah, Roberto.
So I don't, but I was going to say that it's not jumping out of planes, but this is some sort of thrill seeking.
Oh, it's totally thrill seeking.
Yeah.
Do you know anybody like that?
Sure.
Yeah.
Not me. I'm afraid of heights.
Yeah, afraid of heights. Plane jumpers? Bungee jumpers? Julian?
No, I'm not a plane jumper, but I did live in Nepal for a year and I did quite a lot of climbing and trekking. And I would definitely say that for some people, particularly with Everest, it's a little bit more misguided, but there's an element of pilgrimage involved, in which you're connecting to
Interesting.
something bigger than yourself.
Nice. Interesting. So there's this connection with nature and this sense of something bigger than yourself. Maybe the unknown, that's kind of a different take on it. Okay. So, are we there? We're kind of into the case a little bit. I mean, after all, this is probably, sounds like nothing that anybody in this room is doing. We have a sense of kind of perhaps why some people do it and, or some really risky behavior like this, Okay. So now I want to move to the case. All right. So what I'd love for you to do is turn to your neighbor, introduce yourselves, the person sitting next to you, behind you if you want, and just talk to that person or a couple people about just a couple of underlying root causes that you would pull out that contributed to the tragedy that you read about. what do you think are the key underlying root causes that contributed to the tragedy? You all set? Okay. So where should we start? Who wants to get us started? What do you say? Sterling.
I think one of the things Fisher says it, he basically attributes all accidents to human error, and I think that fundamental assumption is one of the reasons why both expeditions fail.
Mm-hmm. So can you be a little more specific? So what exactly would you identify as being human error in this instance?
In this scenario, they attribute perhaps the communication when the climber who has the radio is not where they're supposed to be. They attribute this to human error when perhaps there are other factors that contributed to that beyond individual error.
So would you say it was a breakdown in communication, or would you say it was the bad radios, or?
I mean, I think there are so many factors that contributed that were not human error, like perhaps the weather.
The weather.
Falling on the guy.
The weather, okay? I'm going to put the weather over here. It's kind of a force on the system. Yeah? Do we want to put the radios down?
I mean, but the radios were a result of like the boulder falling, I think, if I understand.
They had bad radios.
Yeah.
How heavier ones?
And few of them.
Yeah. Let's put them down.
Yeah.
Let's put them down. Like when we think about this as a system, resources are important. Yeah? Okay, so radios, and this contributed to, so we put this down kind of thinking about this at the organization level, resources and so forth, and you said it contributes to possibly not great, right? Communication within the team, or teams. Yeah? All right, so we got the weather pressing on the system, that's not good, but we got bad resources, which impairs communication. Okay. Sterling, one more question. Why do we care about communication anyway? Sounds good, but
I think communication is the fundamental thing that would allow them to adapt and change the plan when it needed to be changed. And because they weren't able to communicate, they had no flexibility.
Nice. Okay, so communication is poor, and the problem with that is we're not sure that they were flexible enough to change their plan, which maybe you might want to do because the weather changes, for example. Okay, other thoughts. So this is where we're starting. Other thoughts. Where do you want to go? Maya.
Yeah, another issue with resources they had was the logistical problems that Fisher encountered in the beginning, which kind of pummeled into him being tired and not really starting off at the right place.
Right. So all that stuff when they were going over, remember they were going over the borders, is that what you're talking about? And like the problem with customs and all of that sort of.
And the lack of oxygen delivery in the beginning.
Oxygen, okay. All right, so we've got some of that maybe we could kind of call this the context. Stuff you can't control, right? Problems at the border. And why is that important again?
Well, mainly it started them off on the wrong foot, so Fisher didn't have the right base that he said he likes to.
Yeah, so in terms of the leaders, right? We've got, Fisher, who is, you said, tired. So that's not good, right? So now we're worried about communication, not being able to be flexible. We got a leader who's tired. Okay? So that's not good. Okay.
Well, there's a certain level of hubris here.
Hubris?
Yeah.
In what way?
The mountain wire. We got this wired.
Yes. So
overconfidence.
Yes, exactly. So you guys, there are a lot of really good quotes in this case. You probably, Kay is pulling out one. Do you remember this one?
The yellow brick road.
Yes, the yellow brick road, of course, right? So Fisher says experience is overrated. It's not the altitude that's important, it's your attitude. We've got the big E figured out. We've got it totally wired, right? These days I'm telling you we've built a yellow brick road to the summit. Okay, so this we've got Fisher, who's got this hubris, right? Now let me ask you something. When you're going on like a crazy, or what did you call it again? I don't know.
Pathological.
Well, pathological. Maybe we don't want to use that word quite. But you're going on this like extreme journey, right? Don't you want a little confidence? I mean, really. Don't you need some of this? Let's put it this way. Let me not say don't you need a little bit of it. Don't you need a lot of it? Lexi.
Absolutely. But I think that the way that this was contextualized made this like you made this transition from confidence to ego in a very detrimental way, especially when you look at sort of the evolution of adventure consultants and mountain madness in terms of like the Fisher versus Hall in the sense of like implicit competition between them. And there's something else I was going to say about that.
All right, so I'm going to put this over here as kind of an organizational feature or, inter-organizational feature that there's competition. But go back to what you were saying. So you want a little bit of hubris, but what's the problem here? It's getting out of control?
Yes, I think there's like a competitive element here. And there's a business component here. This is an entrepreneurial venture. They are being paid a lot of money to bring people, maybe not enough money given what they're doing, but they're being paid a lot of money and they see this as an opportunity to benefit financially. And so there's this added incentive that may lead to this like artificial confidence because they have to convince a client that they're the man for the job, and there are different incentives that are coming into play in terms of who they pick to get on their team.
So you don't like that it's a business?
Not that I don't like it. It's just I think it's an important contextual factor.
So it's created this competition. I mean, business isn't necessarily bad, right, folks? No. But what you're saying is it's created this kind of environment where we've got, would we say too much confidence? We need to have it because we need to convince our clients, you're saying.
It's a bit contrived, I think.
Yeah, a bit contrived. A little bit inflated. Yeah, just a touch. Sarah?
Well, and there's a downside to it because Krakauer talks about not questioning Harris's capacity.
Yep.
And he said it was because he'd been trained in a way to think of the leaders as invincible. And so it didn't even occur to him to tell him, you aren't well, you should come down now.
Right.
So there's this flip side of they absolutely need to inspire confidence, and they need to be really heavy-handed about that and say, you have to follow my directions, no questions asked.
Yeah.
And at the same time, they need to be receptive or somehow create an environment where the leaders themselves can get feedback from the people who are following.
So rules are okay, but if there's so much that you can't get, there's not this questioning piece,
right?
Then that becomes a problem.
Unsafe.
Yeah. Unsafe. Yeah. All right, I'm going to track a couple of things as they come up. One of them are these cognitive biases. And the one that's just come up is the overconfidence bias, and I'm sure you've never seen this. Right? Which is the idea that absolutely, yellow brick road, we can do this, right? And Sarah says the problem with that is then, you're less open to feedback, right? You're less open to feedback, and we see as evidence in the case that there's not as much questioning. We want to have questioning. Do we want to have questioning on this trip? I mean, why do we want to have questioning? Miriam, why do we want to have questioning?
Because sometimes individuals need to make decisions in emergencies. So you want to make sure that individuals are asking the best possible questions for others.
But like if I am like in reasonably good shape and I have whatever $65,000-$70,000 and time, then doesn't it make sense that I would just go along with this confident leader? And he's the expert after all.
I mean, it like follows a logical structure, but it's not a structure that's beneficial to individuals trying to survive together in an extreme environment.
Individuals trying to survive together in an extreme environment. Mary.
I think you want to ask a lot of questions because your life is at risk. It's not like someone's going to serve you a meal you might not enjoy or you want to ride that your life is at risk.
Yeah. So what happens when somebody actually tries to ask a question? Do you remember this? There's so many good quotes in here. Okay, this is Krakauer. And, Krakauer, there are a lot of quotes from Krakauer, right? So Krakauer says to Hall, and he's questioning. Like, he's questioning himself. Like, I'm not sure I can do this, actually. So he expresses his concern. So he's not really questioning, but he's at least little feedback. So, he says, it's worked 39 times so far, pal, and a few of the blokes who summited with me were nearly as pathetic as you. So that's shutting them down right there. That's going to do it. I'm probably not going to say anything again or turn around if you've got the guts. Yeah, is it Bob?
So I think what's interesting is also there's the flip side to the argument we've been making here in the case of Dr. Weathers, who is actually able to overturn Hall's concern about his own physical state, even though he's halfway blind, and convince Hall to let him keep going.
Yeah. Now why do you think that's going on? We see that in the case. There are a lot of names in the case, okay? A lot of names. But there's Hansen, too. Remember Hansen? He was the guy who tried to go up the mountain the year prior, didn't quite make it, but he is hell-bent on getting up that mountain. And nobody's going to stand in his way. Why do you think that's the case? Why do you think that's the case? So Rob says there's nobody who's going to, he's able to convince. And we see this a couple of times, right? So he's able to convince the leaders that, yes, indeed, I need to continue up the mountain no matter what. What's your thinking on this?
So are you asking why the leaders aren't standing in his way, or why? Like, what is it that's driving him?
Either one,
okay.
And both.
The one, I think, from the perspective of the guys, I think that there's probably a bit of empathy. And like in the moment, so I think I think there's this gap between like stated decision-making authority and then actual decision-making and what's actually playing out when they're like approaching the summit. And in the moment, like they're really close, and they know what that's like. They've attempted this multiple times, each of them, and they failed, and then they finally done it. And then this guy, he's made it. He made it within like 300 feet the first time, and
that's right.
And I think there's probably a bit of empathy playing out where they don't want to be the ones to tell him that close. Even though they have tried to make it very clear that that they won't tolerate that dissent. But even like up to this point, that's what they've said. But there is this gap between what is actually happening, and there isn't any like clear decision making happening. Like they didn't set that the time for the turnaround once they got to the summit. So that was playing out in the moment.
Right. But what you're saying in terms of, Hansen continuing on, and I think this other guy, Cruz, if I'm getting that name correctly, is also, although he actually got to take it back, but there are a whole bunch of people who are continuing on despite the frozen larynx and the frozen toes and things like that. And they're continuing on, and part of it is, like he was saying, like you put so much time and energy into something. So much time and energy into something, it's hard to turn back. And it's hard for somebody else to turn you back or say, okay, you can turn back. very, very difficult. I would call this one, which you bring up, let's see, the sunk cost effect. So, and this one I'm sure you've also seen, which is the idea that you put so much time and energy, it's just not, you can't turn around the train. You keep going, you keep going. Okay, so far, we've got the sense that, these leaders are pushing really, really hard, but there's also individuals on the team who've invested a lot of time and energy, and they're going to go, no matter what. Are we placing too much blame on these guys? Are we focusing too much on them? I pulled out a couple of quotes to kind of push you in that direction, but are we placing too much blame on these guys? What do you think, Tom?
No, not at all.
How
They're
so?
the leaders.
They're the leaders.
They should take over.
Why
Without
is that?
question, they're the decision makers, and they decided to go further. Even when they started piling up, and when people were slowing down, yeah, they take full blame.
Mm-hmm.
Clear. Right.
Mm-hmm. What do you mean by there? Everybody, there's some people in here who could possibly turn around. So don't you think that individuals should take responsibility and just say, hey, this is not working for me, I can turn around.
It's life and death.
Right.
This is not like, let's try some hot chili sauce. Yeah, this is life or death. Margin of safety is very small here. That's the problem.
Yeah.
And if you get it wrong, then that's it. There's no second chance.
Yeah. So from your perspective, they're just pushing them too far. Or what is it that they're doing wrong in particular? When you think about leadership.
Well, I think personally, my opinion is that there were so many factors, so many variables, that these guys didn't judge them well enough. That the margin of safety when something goes wrong, and something always goes wrong, the weather, equipment, it's going to happen.
Yeah.
So the margin of safety should have been like this, and it was just like this.
So is this like a bad thing to get into in the first place?
Yes.
So you don't like the task? Yeah. It's a bad business.
Yes, it is. It's life or death.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it is. Absolutely. They're in it. Mina?
And I think to build on that, from the beginning, right, the ideas that should have been vetted or had at least a little bit more basis before admitting certain people to come into this.
Okay.
That's where I think the responsibility is really on the leaders.
Yeah.
Right? Because they're the gateway. They're the people who are letting people in and out or recruiting.
So team membership, which you would put on the leaders too.
Yeah.
So if only we had some more fit or prepared folks, do you think?
Potentially. I mean, I can go back and potentially look at details, but I just remember one of the people saying, I felt like we were preparing the mountain for the people instead of the people for the mountain. And so maybe it is not just these set parameters, you're pretty fit, you're this and that, but the training that could have been involved.
The training.
What was happening in advance of this whole thing to make sure people were operating optimally.
So the idea is if we get the right people and we train them up, then this wouldn't have happened. Maybe. Miley?
I think on top of all that, there's also, it doesn't sound like they clearly explain the risks to the people who were involved. That a certain proportion of people who try and climb Everest always die.
Yeah.
No matter what, no matter how prepared they are.
Mm-hmm.
And people need to go into it fully aware of that.
Mm-hmm. You don't think so? I mean, Hansen got within whatever it was, very, very close. So he knows.
When they're talking about it's a yellow brick road, anyone can do it, and it's pretty easier stuff, and it just feels like the external communication of this when they're trying to get clients on board is a little bit optimistic.
A little bit optimistic. So we're kind of back to that, overselling. This hubris piece, the overconfidence, and it's because it's a business that they're doing this. Is that right?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So if only they had known what they were getting into,
Then they still would have died. But
then they still would have died. Got it. Joe, help us out.
There was that quote at the beginning about how they weren't really a team. They were a bunch of individuals that were going to climb the mountain together.
Yeah. What do you make of that? Yeah.
Well,
it's like this thing that's going on right now. Like if you suddenly fell ill, we would be lost. Because we just came together today.
People are nodding. That's the problem. Okay.
But if you had your A608 class all semester, and on the second to last day, you fell ill. I feel like the class then could still sort of work the keys. In this case, they were all dependent on the leader's decision to turn around, and so one of the leaders got sick, and the other leader, they got sick.
He was sick. I mean, this guy, his Fisher was ill. Right? We established that. It's not good.
So they just didn't have it, they were stuck in this one form where there's the leader and everybody else. Whereas maybe they could have figured it out if they had had a little, trust and time working with each other.
Yeah, trust and time working with each other. All right, good. So let's think about how we're going to get that trust and time working with each other. Is it all beforehand? Or there's something about climbing up the mountain we want to fix, Beth?
So I'm thinking that I feel like maybe we're using the word leader kind of generously.
Okay.
And that as I think through this and listen to people's comments, I'm thinking about the idea of how leadership often is presumed to be kind of organically developed. So if you're a good player, then you're a good coach. If you're a good student, you're a good teacher. And if you were often elected for certain or given leadership, then you emerge as a leader later on because you believe that's what you're good at.
Yeah. And if you're a good climber, therefore you're a good
climber, a good
leader.
leader of
Exactly.
other climbers.
Exactly. Makes sense?
I wonder if maybe, to Fisher and the other person,
Paul,
in charge, sort of maybe maxed out on their capabilities. And that it was, they did, and they paid with their lives and the lives of other folks, but that they maxed out on their ability to lead.
From the get-go, sounds what you're saying, because they were climbers, but they were...
Based on their understanding of what it means to lead.
Or their lack of understanding what it means to lead. So these guys were excellent climbers, but excellent climbers, Beth says, doesn't necessarily make them good leaders, Bridget.
Yeah, but I do think a lot about the responsibility of the leaders, because if you think about the context, you've got people who are climbing who are physically impaired, mentally impaired. This is not going to be fun. It's not going to feel good, and you're going to have to push yourself if you're going to be successful. So they have to rely on people who've done this before to tell them when enough is enough.
Right.
But unfortunately, you're not in something that's predictable. The conditions are constantly changing, so you have to keep looking to this leader, because who else? I don't think this is something that they could have just figured out themselves.
Right.
Because they're tired. They can't breathe. They can't think.
No.
The worst possible condition to have to back out of, and you can't follow your instincts, because your instinct would say, I shouldn't be here.
Exactly. Exactly. True. Tim?
I would question the leadership, but not so much the leader himself, but the leadership team. I think the problem became one where he didn't bring in nor encourage their open ability to have contradictory information. So you're right, the people who are paying clients don't have the information, but there are other experienced climbers. I mean, there's a line like A's hire A's and B's hire C's. And if you're truly competent and truly qualified, you bring good people in you and you're willing to listen to them. And that's where I would put the blame, that it's not the group as a whole, although they have some responsibility, that the group dynamic of the leadership was that I'm the boss and they were not strong enough or felt because of their previous relationship willing to contradict him in a strong enough way to have any impact.
Yeah, so when you think about the leadership team, who are you thinking about?
Okay, if you're going to ask me names,
No, forget the names, but
so he had the team. We talked about there's a guy in the middle, a guy in the front, a guy in the back. He's got people who are experienced climbers that are employees, basically, not people who are paying to be there.
Yeah, I mean, he's got these leaders, okay, let's say the leaders, I should put those in quotes, right, Beth? The leaders, right? Hall, Fisher, right? And then we've got these guys, correct?
Right.
Yeah, and you could actually call them, maybe you could call them a senior leadership team. Yep. All right, but there's this group, yeah? And then you've got the clients, And then you've got what?
Sherpas.
Sure.
Good point. Part of the guides. Kind of, sort of. Is this a structure of this group? Like when you think about kind of the status hierarchy going on here, is this what's going on? Mm-hmm. Sean?
I kind of wonder about the clients and where they would see themselves in this hierarchy. And I'm wondering about the lack of teamwork. And when Krakauer talks about one of the great quotes, it seemed as though half the population at base camp was clinically delusional about their own prospects for reaching the top. They all believed that they themselves were more than capable of doing it, but all believed that everybody else on the team was not.
Exactly.
And so almost like in that configuration, I would almost see the clients as these like little individual dots kind of like around and to the side of the leaders, guides, and Sherpas, all kind of like this, not in a hierarchical way, but kind of like all seeing themselves as independent units, not working together as a team, really following anybody.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, this is like a collection of individuals here, these dots. Sean, is this a team activity anyway? Do we need a team anyway? I mean, so what?
I think so.
Why?
Well, I haven't never climbed, but based on what we read, it seems like life or death. It seems like you have to be able to rely on the person in front of you, the person in back of you, to be watching your back, to be there to help you if needed, to communicate dangers ahead, dangers behind, to have that open communication throughout. And if you don't have that, or if you're just concerned with yourself, you have your blinders on, you're worried about your own self because you don't trust that the person behind you, the person in front of you is going to take care of you.
Yeah.
Then you're not taking care of them because you're worried about yourself.
Yeah. Do we have people in here who could actually recognize when things are going wrong? Like, I mean, you trust people based upon their knowledge of something, right? So.
The governing board.
The governing board. Julie?
I just want to pause on the conversation for a second because I don't think Sherpas is a good designation for the last group.
Yeah.
That's an ethnic designation. I think you should have written porters.
Well, porters.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, that's okay. Would you still put them here?
Yeah.
Okay.
Sure would have, but
Okay.
the others are
Okay.
roles rather than ethnic.
Yeah. And you would put them there.
I mean, that's a good
So
question.
it is a good question.
They
If
have
you think
a lot
about
more
it,
expertise.
exactly. So who knows the mountain the best? Mm-hmm. They know the mountain the best, okay? And whether we want to call them Sherpas or porters, they know the mountain the best. And guess what's happening? We got this really strong hierarchy. Remember, there's evidence in the case where even one of there's like Bukrev and then Biddleman, and you know, Bukrev even says, I think Bukrev says, I couldn't even speak up because, or Biddleman's, I think it's Bukrev, who said, Bukrev says, I can't speak up because, you know, Fisher paid more attention to Hall than he would to me. So even here, there's this piece. So even if a guide is recognizing the weather looks bad, he is not likely to speak up. But there are people in here who actually understand the mountain even better. And we don't hear their voices so much, which I think is actually relevant for sure in this. There's also, did you guys notice there are doctors on this trip? There are 3 doctors on this trip. So, right? I think 3. So when you think about, you know, what it takes to recognize that something's going on wrong here, I mean, it's not like, I mean, yes, there's training and so forth, but there's also expertise hidden in here. But where are these guys? They're here. Right? So this whole piece, what I'm pointing out, is the status hierarchy can contribute to a lack of what Sarah called safety, I might call psychological safety, or the comfort in being able to speak up and say when something's not going well. I'm going to abruptly stop there because I think we have enough to talk about what we were doing, what we were trying to do, and so forth. But thanks.
That's good. Thank you very much.
Have some water. All right, so thank you so much, Monica. I just have a couple of questions and then we'll open to our colleagues. First question, is about what you do before a case discussion. I guess the nature of the question is, how do you prepare? And what sort of teaching plan do you bring into a classroom to lead us through what you just led us through? So say some words about preparation and about teaching plans.
Okay, so one of the things I try and do, yes, I've taught this case a lot, but I really need it really right in my head before I walk in. And unfortunately, I can't have other things in my head. So even though I taught earlier today, I actually couldn't look at this case till after I taught that case. So I need to really make sure it sinks in. So I read the case really carefully, even if I've taught the case many, many times. I need to have it like right front and center. And then I really try and think about just a couple of things that I'm trying to get across. And I remember I had a faculty member at HBS who, really taught me a lot about how to teach by the case method. And she said, don't have like 10 things, like pick a couple. Pick a couple. So I show some slides. Generally, as students in my class know, at the end, generally I show some slides. And there's usually like 3 points. So I try and also have those in my head. And then I have what I would call pastors. So there are different buckets of conversation which we need to graze around in. And so a pastor might be, sometimes you can structure it so you can kind of move from pastor to pastor, and sometimes you can have a little bit more free-flowing conversation. And today we did a little bit more free-flowing conversation, but these were the pastors, so I was boarding your comments into stuff that had to do with the organizational structure, stuff that had to do with the team, stuff that had to do with the leaders, and then intra-individual pieces, which I would have then, at the end, come back to kind of each of these levels of analysis. But the pastors, you guys can go back and forth across, but I need to kind of think about them in chunks. And so I'm a really visual person, so I tend to try and see what's going to go on the board, but just generally speaking, I'm going to have a pastor on this and this and this. And so I actually have like a board plan. So that's one of the things in terms of a teaching plan. I have a board plan. So this morning I had, and students who were in my class this morning know we moved pretty quickly. I had 5 boards. So I put together a teaching plan which had kind of key questions. And then I had literally 5 boards. So that, again, not that I know what's going in there, but I know what the general pastors are, and I know what the kind of key questions to be able to get out key topics or key concepts in each of those pastors. When I prepare for class, and I don't know you guys, but I have my students sit in a certain spot because I teach in this classroom, and there are a lot of them, and again, I'm very visual, and so I want to keep track of my calling patterns. When I prepare for class, that's all I'm going to show you. I track my calling patterns, okay? So, and so I want to make sure that I'm calling evenly, and I also want to make sure that I'm paying attention to people in the room who I know maybe from a certain geography. If I knew something about Julian's background, I would be able to bring him in, or somebody who is a climber, etc., and so that I can bring in experts when I want to. And then I need to pay attention to people I've overcalled, so I'd like people will have their hand up and I'm not going to call on them. So I try and think about calling patterns. I try and think about kind of what are the things, key things, couple of things at the end of the day that I want the students to get. And I think about pastors, and I try and get the case in my head. And then the other thing is I just try and personally get psychologically ready to teach. And whatever that means for you, that's what you need to do. I try and go for a run in the morning. Didn't get to today, but generally I go. And that's helpful to me. So, yeah.
Let me ask 1 or 2 more. So a related question. You just talked about preparation in general and teaching plans in general. And as John mentioned, today is a single case session with a group that we won't be convening again. How do you think differently about preparing for and leading case discussions with one-time groups, 13 or 14-week semester classes, And a related question on the difference between degree program students and perhaps executive audiences that you've worked with. How does that enter into your thinking over a period of time, or a one-off, if you will?
Mm-hmm. So I didn't, like, John was saying, I don't know you. I know a couple of people in the room, so it's harder because I can't, not only can I not read your nonverbals very well, but I also don't know when to push you, and so I'm kind of largely guessing. But in class, in a regular class, I spent a lot of time really trying to figure out how much I can push students. I view pushing students as a sign of respect. I'm not trying to catch anybody. If somebody looks like they're having an off day, or they've told me beforehand, and this happened just today with a couple of different students, I'm not going to call them. I want to have a good class. At the end of the day, I want a good class. I have no interest in, doing any harm at all to students. But in order to have a good class, I need to be able to push people. And so I'm looking for ways to do that. And over time, I get to know where people are at. And there are some people who need to just hear their voice in the room. And so if they raise their hand, I grab it. Or if they don't, and they look prepared, I grab them anyway. There are some people who I get to know are very good at coming in the diagnosis part of the conversation and need to be pushed towards the so what action part of the conversation. The types of cases I teach have the same cadence: problem, diagnosis, action question. This one doesn't have so much an action question, but generally they have that cadence. And so once I get to know them, I push them. Executives is also same thing. I don't know the folks. So there is one thing that I do more with executives, which is a much more what's called directive. So I give them a little bit. I just find that that's helpful, in part because they're seeing different people. So I tend to do a little bit more kind of setting up of this is where we're going. First, we need to make a decision about so-and-so. We need to help so-and-so make a decision about something. So the best way to do that is to do a thoughtful diagnosis of the team that he or she has built, and et cetera, whatever. And so I give like a bigger opening, I think, to kind of frame the conversation. And then I usually try and ask whoever is chairing the session whether I can role play or cold call or things like that kind of tend to jack up the energy a little bit. But if they don't want that, or that's not the kind of crowd, I don't do it. So I generally try, if I can, to check in with the chair of an executive program so I get a feel for the group, because otherwise I'm just completely blind.
Final question, and then we'll turn to our colleagues. So the title of today's session is called Learning to Lead Through Case Discussion. I wonder if you might say a few words about how do we use case discussions to teach people how to learn to lead.
Okay, so the title of today's discussion is Learning to Lead Through Case Discussion. I don't think you can teach somebody to lead, but I do think people can learn to lead. So I don't profess to teach, really, leadership, but I teach collections of individuals and try and create the conditions so that they can learn. The cases that I teach usually do have some case protagonist, generally. And if there's a case protagonist, the nifty thing is you can say, Colin, what should Eric Peterson do, for example, which was the opening case for our course. And you need to then step in the shoes of Eric Peterson, and then I have you role play, and guess what? All of a sudden, even though I'm not taking you out to the school or the site or whatever, you actually have a chance to practice. So the nice thing about cases as a way of learning to lead is because usually there's an individual who is a case protagonist or a couple of people, you can actually try out your good ideas. Excuse me. So in theory, if you say, they needed to communicate better and da-da-da-da, you can say, well, let's give that a try. How are you going to do that? I'm going to call my boss. Okay, give me a ring. So then we can try it. And then all of a sudden you find out, where your good ideas fall down or don't. So you actually get to practice a little bit. So I think it's a nice it can be a good holding environment, a nice environment for actually trying out some of your good ideas if Again, you got to watch people and whether they're ready for doing that and so forth. So I spend a lot of time trying to create the classroom context so people feel safe yet, accountable for engaging.
Should you take some questions from our colleagues? You want to do them up there, or you want me to?
Whichever.
Whichever.
Yeah.
All right. So we have terrific time for questions from colleagues. So please go ahead.
One of the things that strikes me about a great style is very good at making people feel comfortable, even in these sort of big impersonal environments. And I know you said you read people's non-verbal cues. Are there any other strategies you explicitly or consciously use to try and make people feel comfortable?
Yeah, there are a lot of strategies. Some of it's pretty tactical. So, I try and get closer to a person so that, you and I are just having a conversation and it's not 90 people. If you're doing a role play and you look uncomfortable, I might come over and stand by you a little bit so that I'm on your side. If I feel like I'm going to kind of try and push you or challenge you, I might move away from you. There are ways in which I like to break the boundary. I might just kind of, when somebody's up, and you've seen this before, I might sit down so that I'm part of the group. And I walk around, so you get used to me walking around and, kind of worry about that. I'm not like trying to see what notes you're taking, Lexi, but, And the other thing I do is I really try and use humor. So if somebody's stuck, and you just saw that today, not here, but in class, I try the best I can to use humor so that person can save face. Again, I have no interest in doing harm or embarrassing anybody. So if I can figure out a way to save face with that person so that they'll feel comfortable speaking up again, I do that.
Please, Lexi.
To what extent do you anticipate sort of the arc of how the class moves within an hour and a half? Does it generally follow the same sort of plan that you've seen in previous years, each time you teach a case? And how do you anticipate that versus just flowing, moving with the flow of the class?
Yeah, so it's really not a bull session with Higgins. There is kind of a place we're going, and we're going to get there somehow. So if I have to play devil's advocate or push you another way, I will. However, that doesn't mean I know exactly how we're going to get there. So what I like to do and I use boards a lot, as people in my class know, is I try and kind of give me space to move. So if we're not, you guys are over here, I can also signal to you that you've moved backwards in the conversation. We started over here, and we moved over here, and I ask you a question, and you're back over here. I'll go back over here. I don't need to say, oh, we already talked about that. I just added over here. And then I go back over here. So that we have a sense of kind of movement. And so I'm very conscious of time. I always end right on time with students, and I try and start right on time because I think that's just respectful. If for some reason something needs to get squashed, it's me. So today in class, I felt like we were in a really good discussion, but I got squeezed at the end, and that's okay. I'm going to I'm going to go quickly through. If I have a couple of slides to show, I'll go quickly through. But I don't know exactly within the pasture how we're going to graze around. So I have to be able to adjust my questions if there are particular points that need to come out. Now, if something comes up, which happened not the class today, but the class on Tuesday, that is something that I want to do at some point in the semester, like a little exercise and something. Like somebody said something about, leadership being, they're making a whole string of comments, but leadership was innate. This guy was just, was just born that way, basically. I was like, that is a comment that I'm going to grab because I have a little exercise to do around that. And if it comes up, whenever it comes up, we are going to grab that and do it right there so that people understand. Otherwise I wouldn't be here, right, if I didn't think leadership could be in part learned. We are going to do that exercise. So when those things come up, I am happy to deviate from whatever teaching plan I have because those are like gems. You got to grab it. Similarly, I deviate if somebody has come up with an idea for, like we're in the diagnosis part of the conversation. Again, remember the cadence, kind of problem definition, diagnosis, action. Somebody comes up with a really nifty solution, and we're pretty good on the diagnosis. Like we as a collective has kind of gotten around to most of the stuff we want to get around in. I'll jump right to action and have that person role play. And people have seen this happen in my class. You say you're going to have a meeting, come down and have the meeting. Let's have that meeting. And then I'll throw the other students into roles so they respond to the person who's up front. So if there are precious opportunities to grab energy, usually I watch for energy, or raise energy, I'll do it anyway I can. But then that just means I need to look at the clock so that I always end on time.
Julie Rubin.
Yeah, I wanted to ask you about a particular pivot that you did and your logic behind it.
Okay.
So, I believe it was you were talking about what had kind of gone wrong and kind of raised the question of profit and the extent that this, at the beginning, because they were doing this incredibly challenging thing and doing it for a motive of money,
Right.
that might have distorted things. And you pulled back and you said, well, it's a business. It's, something wrong with business?
Yeah.
Sort of like, I'm going to challenge you to,
Right.
have to call in capitalism, if you're going to want to go down that, that route. And I was wondering why you did that. Did you do it because you wanted to be pushed back about the legitimacy of this as a business?
Yeah.
Did you do it because if we went down that road, it would shut down these other things that you wanted to
Yeah.
draw out?
Okay, so Lexi said a number of different things, and I had to figure out which one I was going to pull out. You did. You said a number of different things. The inter-organizational competition, then it was a business, there was too much confidence. You said like 3 things. So I was trying to think through which one am I going to go after here, because I kind of liked all of them. And I need to get to the overconfidence bias and that sort of thing. I mean, Kay, who I know just left, Kay cracked that piece way too early for me. So I had to let it simmer for a little bit and not take it. It was too fast. So I wanted to kind of noodle around a little bit. And she got to the inter-organizational competition piece. And I thought, oh, that's interesting. And then you said business. Now, sometimes I've had kind of an interesting conversation around whether, who the heck cares that it's a business? So it's a business. So that's why we have the strategy. Why is that? And then people are like, well, no, that's not really it. It's the wrong goal. We didn't get to that today. But it's a really fun conversation around businesses having particular goals. And what the heck is a goal here? Well, in their business, they promised 100% success to get to the summit. And then we have a really nifty conversation around, what's the problem with that goal? It's not safety. And people die. And then that's a very bad business to be in. If the leaders die and the people die, that's not a good business. So it can be kind of a fun conversation if we want to go there. And what happened was I kind of threw it out on the line, and it didn't get grabbed. And so I left it. And I grabbed one of her other pieces, which was inter-organizational competition, and kind of double-clicked on the overconfidence piece and left it. But sometimes, and then I was thinking in my head, how are we going to go back to the fact that the goal is wrong? Like any organization, you have a goal. There's a rotten goal. Everybody's trying to get to the top. We weren't quite there yet. So I was thinking that might have gotten to that piece, but we didn't get there. And I thought that might have been a way to do it. It was also a little bit just poking fun. So some of that was happening, but mostly I wanted to kind of dangle that carrot and see if it was picked up.
Thank you. We want to come to this side of the room. Katie, go ahead.
Yep. How, if at all, has your teaching changed from the business school to the ed school?
Yeah, so I really love teaching here. And part of the reason is because there's so many educators in the room that they up my game. Right? I have people kind of asking me why I did such and so. And that's really neat to be able to think about your craft. And don't necessarily get that, or didn't necessarily get that. I will say on the flip side, people at HBS, the students, have been doing this in every single class. So one of the things that they know how to do really well that I'm still working on right now in A608, students in A608, is building on each other's comments. So what I was doing here is I was linking a lot of the comments. I was trying to draw. I was doing a little bit of that. And I much prefer to have students do that. I want to do less talking and get you to do more. And they're very good at doing that. They don't just say building on somebody's comment, they're actually building on somebody's comment. So I feel like it takes a longer time here just because we're not used to it. It's just like teaching by the case method is a skill, learning by the case method is a skill. So I find like I have to do a little bit more I need to be a little bit more explicit, like just like so and Katie said and so said and da. And I'm trying to get you to see that it's really helpful. We want to have a great class. We want to move the conversation forward. And the only way to do that, if you're not practiced, is for me to do more of it. I'd rather do less of it. So that would be, a little bit more what I have to work a little hard on that particular angle. But in terms of the craft perspective, it's been really nice.
Dean Ryan.
So I thought this was terrific. The question I have is about pulling it all together at the end rather than setting up front what you are trying to accomplish. So some of it is obvious, right? I mean, so you read this case and you realize, okay, we're going to talk a little bit about leadership, we're going to talk about the teams. But I have to say the cognitive biases, I didn't see that coming.
Yep.
And so I wonder, have you ever flipped it, or do you sometimes say, well, in this case, what I want to focus on are these three principles.
Yeah.
So that right from the very beginning, that's structuring the conversation. Or would that, do you think, stifle it too much?
Yeah, great question. I was just going to show you real quick what I would show at the end, because then you can do that thought experiment.
Yeah.
Okay, so I'm just going to show you really quickly what I would have shown at the end. And students in my class are getting all sorts of previews here, but that's just fine. There we go. Okay, so this is what I would have shown. This is what I showed last year. I would say that I was pushing you. I was boarding your comments in 3 different levels. And I would start at the inter-individual level and talk about these biases, impaired judgment affect everybody. At the team level, the one piece, the one thing, which Sarah almost said was psychological safety, and introduce this notion that in order to get good ideas, whether it be from doctors or Sherpas or porters or whomever, we need to have a psychologically safe environment. I would talk about the research on psych safety, and then I would talk about the organization level and the system level. Now, I'm not going to go through this, but what I want to show you is that I lead with questions. So some faculty who teach by the case method like to tie things up really neatly, so I don't want to give the impression because I show stuff at the end that it's all in a neat little bow. I actually try and leave them with learning questions, and I ask them to keep a learning journal. Now, to your question of why not tell them all this up front. So for example, I would never tell them all about the cognitive biases up front, because then I'm just kind of, I'd much rather have them sink into it themselves, and also I think it's just a different way of teaching a case, It would be more kind of an application. So this is this is very, very inductive, but I've said to my students, generally what I like to do is give you the theory or a reading after the case. So the idea is, like if you're preparing, leaders are going to make a difference in the world, you need to be able to exercise judgment. And you need to be able to form your own ideas and your own kind of hypotheses. So if I pre-wire them and I tell them, and this is what this case is about, too specifically, then I'm already telling them how to narrow and focus their lens. That doesn't mean that I don't ask questions to try and get them here at the end.
Right.
So on the other hand, I don't mean to imply, maybe I did, that I don't say anything at the front. So what I said at the front is this is a case about high-stakes decision-making. I'm not sure whether I said if it was I often teach this kind of in leading teams kind of modules within PPE programs. It's a case about leadership. It's a case about teams. I do general kind of so that you're thinking about teams or you're thinking about, I'm not going to narrow your focus too much because that's too deductive, and I prefer to have them develop their own theories and then give them some ideas, some theory, some frameworks, some concepts to hang their good ideas on. And then they can pick, and I tell them I'm not here to sell you any particular theory. At the end of the course, at least this course in which this is taught, they need to develop their own theory of entrepreneurial leadership, and they can pick and pull whatever has come up in the class through discussion or through frameworks or through readings they've had. But at the end, I want them to be able to think and develop ideas for themselves.
John Mehta.
So yeah, this is great. So to just listen to the debrief, it sounds very complicated. There's you're interacting with people in real time. You're writing on the board. You have some sense of the categories. You're keeping track of the seating chart and the time and the things you want to pull out. But at the same time, you seem very present in response to each and every comment, focus. So, just reflecting on non-case teaching, I can definitely remember, I do a lot of discussion teaching. I can remember the first time I did a discussion, finding the two streams really difficult, just being present in one and just having this ongoing dialogue.
Yeah.
And I feel like if I started with case teaching, in a sense, like some of that would be helpful, but in some sense I'd be starting over. So you need to say something to potential faculty members or students who might do this in team meetings or something like, what was it like when you did the first one? Was it a simpler case? And sort of how do you build from there to here?
Okay. The first time I did this,
It'll make us feel better.
well, there were some conditions in place. I had an 8-week at home and a 1.5-year-old, so it was pretty crazy. So I was basically just trying to. So somebody would say something, I wasn't sure what they said because you're too tired. I would ask somebody else. It was survival tactics. But at any rate, no, I think here's the thing. Okay, so when I first started trying to teach this way, even though the readings are tiny. Really, I mean, a case is 15 pages long. How could this be so complicated? I tried to figure out every single which way the conversation could possibly go. And I'll never forget, I was staying really late at HBS, and one of my senior faculty colleagues said, "Monica, what are you doing?" And and of course, I like to be prepared and so forth, and and she goes, "You can't possibly figure that out. So you just need to trust that we're going to get there. You're going to get there with the class." And that was like a huge aha for me, that I wasn't in case teaching. You are now the person who is working with the students, and if you're going to get to where you need to go. Yeah, it's a craft. You need to ask certain kinds of questions, but it's not. You don't have to. It's not quite so complicated as figuring out every single piece of it. So I think that's helpful if you create. Yeah, you do need to be present and create the kind of rapport, so that students feel like we're in this together, and we trust Higgins is going to ask some questions that will get us to where we need to go. But I think there's so many of the. I teach a class on this, so yeah, I think there's some skill to it, but I don't. I think it's. You need to also figure out what supports work for you. So for me, I said I'm very visual. So for me, if I am going to have a big class, I really like people sitting in the same space. Because I just, but that may not be true for you. For me, I like having a board plan so I can just kind of generally know when I need to kind of move. But, some people that may not be the kind of support you need. I think a lot of these things do apply about kind of really trying to have some kind of direction in terms of general pieces or arcs, and then working with the students to kind of, using your term, to get to deeper learning, right? And I think that carries, and having kind of the mutual respect and trust and ideas about, really not wanting anybody to fall on their face. Me, not anybody, everybody. If I call you to start the class, it's because I think you're prepared, and I want to have, again, I always want to have a great class.
Quick follow-up, and then I'm going to turn to Siegfried. Say a word about your listening skills, how you develop those.
How I developed them? Actually, I watched a lot of people. So I know that's one thing that we're really eager to, just work on here is kind of sitting in on each other's classes. So it's kind of watching other people, and then for me, just get out of yourself. It really doesn't matter. Like, you just do not worry about things. And once you stop worrying about kind of whatever else is on your mind or how your hair looks, whatever, you stop worrying about this stuff, you can listen a lot better. So.
Siegfried, go ahead.
Yeah, thanks. I'm from the business school actually, and crashed this party here.
Excellent. Welcome.
I was wondering, like, seeing the case discussion more as an open or narrative group discussion, I was wondering, why did you choose especially this introduction, or like, why do people climb high mountains?
Yes.
Because, like, I think at the business school they would start like, what is the Mount Everest, or what is the challenge of the Mount Everest, or something like that.
Yeah.
So what drives you to choose one introduction like before the other one? Because this is what directs the discussion in a very strong way, isn't it? Or leads the discussion in a very strong way.
Yeah, it can. Because nobody in the room has experience. So generally speaking, I'm teaching, I have somebody has some kind of experience in something. Even, today we did an advertising case, but I had a couple people in marketing and education, very helpful. Nobody has this experience. So what I wanted to do was to at least get us into the place. The other reason I spent a little bit longer is I had a sense that maybe some people hadn't read the case. So I started off with a turn and talk as well. Like, I didn't have to do that. I could have just started off with one person. That would have been very HBS style to just cold call somebody. But first of all, I wouldn't cold call in this context. But beyond that, I did a turn and talk so that you could learn from each other and just share and kind of get moving. But I also wanted energy. So energy is, to me, the barometer of a great class is energy. I want people walking out and continuing to talk about it. And the way to start, and one way, there are a lot of kind of tactics, but one way is what I did was just to get the energy up. And also to see that it was extreme. I mean, that's the thing,
We have time for one or two more. I'm going to turn this back to Dean Round. Tell us your name.
Maria.
Got it.
I'm gonna be a little bit skeptical here.
Yeah.
I love cases. I love reading them. I get excited. I love working with cases with groups. But sometimes I'm not very confident anyway. We're capitalizing on the professor's expertise when we do the whole class. We do a case.
Yeah.
Sometimes I feel that maybe most, if not all, we could kind of sit down in small groups and come up with everything.
Yeah, no, I totally hear you. When I went to business school, I went to a business school up at Dartmouth, which was half case, half quant, and thank goodness we had problem sets for accounting. I really needed that, So I do think this method is more or less appropriate, or, it's easier for certain kinds of things. Having said that, you can run numbers in cases, and you can actually crunch things out. So I just did a particular kind of case. But you certainly can, and even in the course that I teach, you can do it. So what you need to do is you might have what's called what I call is kind of a flying lecturette in the middle of it. So there's something that you need to get across. Like, I didn't spend very much time here, and there are other biases I would have gone through. I can stop and do it. So when it comes up, I grab it and I do it. I do it at the end. I could do it at the front end of another class. I have lots of opportunities to do it, but I still need you to think. So you're right. It could be a balance, and in some classes you may need more of one and more of the other. But it's a tool. It's a tool in your toolkit to use. Yeah.
Thank you. Let me turn this back to Dean Ryan.
All right. Listen, thanks to all of you for coming. I hope you'll come back on November 13th for Ed Missouri. Monica, thank you so much, and Jim, thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.